Since the beginning of Season 20, Apex's player base has grown, with many returning players, but also plenty of new players. So today, I thought I'd share one tip for every legend in Apex that will hopefully come in handy for new and returning players in Season 20 and beyond. Now, the first tip that actually works no matter what legend you play, before we get into the specific legend tips, is that one of the best ways to improve at any game, including Apex, is watching back your own gameplay from time to time. Now, the way I do it is by using Outplayed, where I've set it up so it automatically clips moments in my games. That way, after a game or after a few games, I can go back and look at key moments during the match, and watching these back gives you a better perspective in the decisions that you should have made differently. Trust me, watching back your own gameplay, you'll be saying to yourself, why on earth did I do this? I should have done that. And doing this often means you'll be thinking smarter when you're actually playing the game, because you remember how it would look if you were watching this back. So if you're on PC, you can download Outplayed. There's a link in the description, and once you have that open, you can set it up to capture the entire game if you'd like, or you can manually capture clips by pressing a hotkey throughout the game, or my favorite feature is by using the highlight. This way, Outplayed will automatically save clips when I get a kill, or an assist, or if I revive a teammate, or even if I die. And I find clipping moments where I get kills and where I die is a good way of seeing what I did right, what I did wrong, and what I could do better. And after each session of playing Apex, it nicely sorts them in a designated folder, so you can go back and look at all the gameplay and take a look at what you need to do. And luckily, Outplayed sponsored this video, so big thanks to them, because it really comes in handy when you're trying to get better at Apex, or even editing videos like this where I need clips for the gameplay. So let's kick it off with Bangalore. When you can, you want to try and peek corners while sprinting with Bangalore. Instead of just doing general side-to-side strafing, if you can sprint diagonally, it means that if the enemy shoots you, your passive will immediately activate. That way you can be much more evasive or close the gap and gun them down, because her passive only activates if you are sprinting. For Fuse, we have a tip that a lot of people seem to forget. You can actually use his ult for scouting and gathering intel, because it allows you to do a 3x zoom while holding your ult. This is especially useful if you don't have a legend like Vantage, and you want to spot any squads in the distance, or rats that might be hiding outside of the zone. For Ashe, it's important to know that with her level 3 greedy snare perk, it actually creates multiple snares. So if your arc snare crosses past an enemy, then a snare will latch onto that enemy, but the original snare will carry on in its path, and it can do the exact same for as many enemies as it crosses before it reaches a surface. So keep this in mind if you are fighting an enemy in a small area or a choke. With this perk, you can snare their entry legend along with all the legends that are following behind them. And a little bonus tip for Ashe: if you ult onto a closed loot bin and then open it, the ultimate will disappear and nobody can follow you. Mad Maggie is a very strong legend in Season 20, and it's pretty easy to pick her up. But one tip is that Maggie's Wrecking Ball will continue after the first player's hit, and it will bounce around until it hits a second player or until it runs out. Now, if you have her level 2 fire perk, you can create 2 thermite crosses with her ult, as long as the Wrecking Ball has charged up enough before hitting the first enemy. It doesn't take long, you just want to make sure there's a little bit of distance between you and the enemy if you want the fireball to explode when it hits the first player. Once you've got this distance down, you can assure every time you hit someone with your ball, it's going to create a fire explosion. But remember to be mindful that the ball will carry on in its path, so you want to make sure you're well out of the way of its potential path, because it can stun a second player, and that includes you. For Ballistic, the Rampage and Sentinel will actually be charged up if they're in his sling during his ultimate. And this is more viable now, because since Season 20, the sling weapons will appear with scopes on them. And that means the Sentinel has a 2x HCOG scope when in his sling, so it's actually a lot more useful than it was before. So keep this in mind if you do want a charged up Rampage or Sentinel. Pathfinder's Grapple on Knock perk is great. However, you must know this: Pathfinder's Tactical won't reset if you're still in the air when you get the knock. This is because Pathfinder's Tactical doesn't actually start its cooldown until you've lost momentum from the grapple, or until you've touched the ground. So be mindful of this. If you're getting a mid-air knock with a shotgun, let's say, you won't reset his tactical. So if you can wait just a fraction longer, then it's a good idea to do that. Wraith is a pretty self-explanatory legend, and if you want to play with your team, then a good idea is to use her ultimate to actually engage a fight. Going from a safe spot into the fight with your portal means that you can get some damage off, and if things don't go your way, you can hop back in the portal. But if things do go your way, you know you have that safety net for after the fight if a third party shows up. So try and use your ult this way, rather than always saving it for if your teammate gets knocked. When you're playing Octane, use your stim towards the end of a healing item to get a free stim. It's that simple. Anytime you're using a med kit or Phoenix kit, you might as well do this. It's literally a free stim. Revenant is crushing Apex right now, and the main tip for him is get your teammate to play Conduit. No, seriously, the Revenant Conduit duo is insane. So if you can have Conduit on your team, it's gonna make you even better at Revenant. But if you wanted a tip for him, then learn to use his tactical aggressively. After you deal a bit of damage to an enemy or you can crack them, you can use your tactical to close the gap, but aim to land with a slide so that you have enough time to pull out your weapon while evading the enemy's fire. Being able to do this and pair it with some tap strafes will make you much better at using his tactical aggressively, because you've got to remember that it takes time to pull out your weapon after using his tactical. Horizon is pretty self-explanatory, and she's just a good legend all round. But I see a lot of players forgetting to strafe side to side while gravity lifting. Players think they're invincible just sitting in the gravity lift, and while you're harder to hit, adding a simple left and right strafe as you're rising makes you 10 times harder to hit. And to improve this, go into the firing range and practice hitting your shots while strafing. Once you get that nailed down, you're going to be a great Horizon player. Using Valkyrie's jetpacks before attaching to a zipline will give you moon boots. You'll have low gravity when detaching from the zipline if you jetpacked into the zipline. And this is a very fun trick to use, but it can also come in handy in many different situations around all of the maps, especially if enemies are chasing you on the zipline. You can get to places where they wouldn't be able to, so give it a go. Newer Bloodhound players don't tend to use their tactical as much as they should, and that's out of fear that it will give away their position. But in reality, using your tactical near an enemy will almost always give you the advantage over the small amount of information that they get from seeing the Bloodhound scan somewhere in the vicinity. And in Season 20, Bloodhound's tactical perks are a must. They reduce your cooldown so you have a 20-second scan, and the scan is improved with an increased duration. So be using Bloodhound tactical as much as you can, especially when entering buildings. The information you get from a scan will pretty much always give you an advantage going into the fight. Honestly, Crypto needs an entire video for himself because he's a very tricky character to master. But since we're giving out tips, this is a pretty unique one. Crypto can actually heal while using his drone. You have to throw out his drone while entering it, and just as your screen is shifting, click your healing button and you'll start healing. And in some circumstances, you could pair this with his ultimate by immediately popping his ultimate once you go into the drone at the same time as healing, and if you time it right, then you'll heal the shields that you lost and you can attack the enemies that are nearby. Like I said, it's a very situational trick, but if you're going to be healing and no one's actively pushing you, you might as well try this. For Seer, there is actually a setting that you might want to have a look at where you can change the sensitivity while using his passive. You can do this for mouse and controller, so if you find being too slow while using his heartbeat sensor, you can just crank this up a little bit. And a small bonus tip for Seer, remember that his tactical stops enemies from using their abilities, and if you're fighting a lifeline who already has a knocked teammate, it's a good idea to try and use your tactical on her, because it will stop her from being able to drone revive her teammate. Instead, she'll have to manually do it herself, so one day you might find this tip come in handy. Vantage's sniper is the most important part of her kit, and it's one of the most powerful ultimate abilities in the right hands, and that's why you should always try and carry Ult Accelerant. And in Season 20, this is even better because you can pair them with this perk, which gives you 4 bullets from an Ult Accel instead of 2. 4 bullets go a very long way, especially if you're playing with your team, calling out when you've hit the enemies because they'll take more damage and your teammates can swoop in. As you can see, it's important to have bullets in your sniper, so make sure you carry those Ult Accels. Gibraltar is one of those legends where you've just got to play him to feel when it's right to use his abilities, and his bubble timing is very important. You don't want to use it too early, but you don't want to leave it too late. But a unique tip for Gibraltar is if you find yourself needing to hide behind a door, you can actually throw his bubble down, and if you place it right, it can prevent the enemies from breaking the door, because instead of meleeing the door, it forces them to melee the bubble. Now, they can still throw grenades, but they might not always have grenades, and this could save your life when you need to pop a shield bat behind a door, so I thought I'd share that with you. Now, Lifeline should always have a gold knockdown shield if your team has one. Always give it to Lifeline, and make sure if you're playing Lifeline, you scream at your teammates to give you the gold knockdown shield, because of course she has one of the best revive abilities. That is unless you have a Newcastle on your team, but then you guys can scrap it out. And a little bonus onto that, let's say you've just killed a squad and one of their death boxers have a gold knockdown shield. You can revive one of your teammates with your drone and pick up the gold knockdown shield during the revive, and it will still apply. That's a very unique tip to save time if it ever happens. Also, Lifeline's care package can be climbed on, so use it as cover or to get to hard to reach places if you need to, especially since it comes down really quickly now, unlike before. Mirage has a perk where his ult cooldown is reduced to 30 seconds, which actually means there's only 15-second downtime between your ultimate because the cooldown actually starts before the decoys have disappeared. So you should almost always use this perk, as you'll be constantly bamboozling any enemies, and the footsteps that these decoys create are really good at distracting enemies close range, allowing your team to capitalize on this confusion. And this is a tip for his decoys that's been around for a long time, but placing the decoy crouching behind doors is a really great way to trick enemies and giving you a chance to flank them. Similarly, you can place them standing at death boxes or at crafters to trick your enemies into shooting them. When using Loba's ult, if there's a third item that you want but don't have space to grab it, you can actually locate it using this trick. Ping the item that you want to find in the black market, and then look at the ping and hold down ping again, and it will create a line to that object. And this will help you locate the exact position of the item so you can go and swoop it up. Newcastle's ult can break other Legends' ultimate abilities, such as a Wattson ult or a Horizon ult. So be mindful of this if there is a squad bunkered down with a Wattson ult, or if you need to save your teammate from a Horizon ult. And a bonus tip for him, when you're looting death boxes, it's a good idea to throw down his shield and face it in the most likely direction for third parties, because the last thing you need is getting Krabered while looting when you had a shield the whole time. My one tip for Conduit is to play with a Revenant. My tip for Caustic is remember that you can activate your own gas trap, and this can be useful in many ways. For example, if you need some cover to pop some heals, the gas cloud can provide a good amount of cover. You could also use this as a substitute for your ult. If you know an enemy is about to push you, setting off your canisters early means they can't do anything about it, and it will cover a larger area than its trigger radius. Or if there's enemies around a corner, throwing your tactical and shooting it might be able to reach them, whereas otherwise it would never have triggered. So be mindful of this. Sometimes you could use a tactical instead of your ult. This Wattson tip is pretty similar to Vantage, because you should definitely be carrying Ultimate XLs when you have the opportunity, because Wattson can carry 2 Ult XLs per slot. So this is useful for not only her, but also for her teammates. Wattson can also fully recharge her ultimate from an Ult XL, so if you're carrying these, your ultimate can be used at any given situation, and even in situations where you just need cover, because like Lifeline's ult, Wattson's ult can be used as cover, and you can climb on top of it to reach places or a specific peak you'd like to do, so make sure you're carrying Ult XLs for you and your team at all times. In the moment, many players forget that Rampart's ultimate can break doors. That's right, Sheila can blast down doors in an instant, so if you ever find an enemy holding a door or trying to pop some shield cells, pull out your ultimate and melt them down. And this is even more useful because you're gonna have your ultimate much more often with her perks in Season 20 that reduce her ultimate cooldown and reduce the pull out and wind up time, so players will have even less time to react to this. And finally, with Catalyst, when using her ult inside a building, you can look down at your feet before you place it, and this will mean there won't be a gap where you were stood, so you can fully cut off the entire room with her ult. And also, don't forget, when you're playing Catalyst, you don't get affected by any enemy Catalyst abilities other than her passive. You can't open her blocked doors. This means you can run right through her traps and right through her ultimate, and I actually often see players forgetting this. So like I said, let me know any more tips that you have in the comments, because I'm sure some of you probably have even more useful tips than I mentioned in this video.